Welcome to Conversations on the Future of Education. I'm Dr Wenmoth, your host for this series, and today I'm exploring the future-focused approach to educational leadership with Dr Jason McGrath, a principal, an academic, and more recently a researcher with the Centre of Education Research and Innovation in Paris, a part of the OECD. Jason, I really appreciate you giving some time to have this conversation. I've looked forward to having a talk with you for a while, and your background particularly is intriguing, and the workshops that I've watched you run around future thinking. Do you want to just, for the sake of people who might be watching, just give us a little bit about who you are and what your background is in this area?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. It's nice to connect again. I've just returned back to Australia from working at the OECD Centre for Educational Research and Innovation. Um, really linked to my PhD, which was on what if compulsory schooling was a 21st century invention. But prior to going to Paris, I worked as a teacher for over 30 years, and in particular a principal of a K-12 school in New South Wales. So that's my background. So yeah, it's been interesting to look at to take the experience of a practitioner into the policy and research realms, and to connect those three things: policy, practice, and research.
Yeah, and I guess coming back from Paris now into the context that you are in Australia and I am in New Zealand, and we were discussing just before how, you know, at one level it's good to be thinking about all the future stuff, but it seems like we're in an interesting time, as people say, in our education systems, where that focus seems to be narrowing back a little, maybe at least to the present, if not the past. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, if I had to just nominate one finding from being in Paris and in Europe for the 3.5 years, it was simply some words of a colleague who said we need to talk to each other a bit more, and I think it's particularly the case in our region, because you see in Europe, for example, and other parts of the OECD, there are very strong investment in talking to each other, not to what we often hear over here as policy borrowing, but to actually learn from each other. Even just explaining our own policies can get some critical feedback. But it's amazing being in a meeting over there and someone hears something, thinks that's actually what we've been looking for. That's the missing ingredient. And I think that's why it's nice for us to connect across the ditch, because I think we need to do a bit more of that. And if for no other reason than to talk to each other and listen to each other. And I think with the world being more divided and more complex, taking that time just to create space to think and to learn and reflect, I think that in itself is a really powerful message going forward. And I think it provides a bit more, add more hope into the situation, that people feel not everything's rushed. We can take our time, look for long-term strategic change while addressing some of the shorter-term issues.
Yeah, I pick your comment about the policy borrowing or plagiarism sometimes. I mean, I see a lot of that go on. We're seeing it here in New Zealand at the moment with ideas that just seem to be appropriated without necessarily thinking it through. It seems to me that, if we do that only, all we're doing is we're destined just to continuing what we've always done. And you were chatting before about some of the contexts that you have been exposed to through your work in the OECD, where that can give some really practical examples of the sorts of conversations that you're talking about. Do you want to tell me a bit more about those?
Yeah, so just to give you a really simple example, and this is why I think policy borrowing is a negative term for not talking to each other. Take, for example, the need to look at environmental issues in education. It's a growing issue. Everyone recognises the need for it, and the PISA research is really provides some interesting analysis that shows that the more kids know about science, the less optimistic they are about being able to do anything about climate change. And that's a really interesting finding to unpack. But what it shows is the need to teach science, obviously, but to bring with that, there's a whole other aspect of learning, living in a community that we need to bring. So, and when talking to other countries, like Ireland is just introduced, or was just introduced actually, a new senior class course on this. Well, what's interesting is they've learned some of the lessons that from the conversations with other countries, and that is, for example, you can't solve climate change by yourself. So they've made sure that this course involves group solutions. So it's a group project as part of their assessment. It picks up the locally based approach. So they have to, so the part of it is a focus on locally based solutions. So it's just a really good example where some people have, through the conversation, have picked up some great ideas, which if we take time to listen and reflect and see where this goes, I'm not saying we should all do what Ireland are doing, but I'm saying we'd like to know what they are doing so that we can make our own choices and look at how we can harness some of those ideas. That's just one really practical example of dealing with the complexity in our society at the moment.
And I like what you said there, Jason, that you said this teaches about how important it is to teach science. You're not ruling that out, but there has to be the other depth thing. And I guess I'm thinking here in New Zealand, we've got this quite an emphasis emerging on what they're calling a knowledge-rich curriculum, where there's a lot of attention being given to the stuff and those facts and the details we need to learn. And there is concern, and I'm not sure how valid it is or not at the moment, but there is concern in pursuing that in doing so, we learn a lot about science, for example, but not necessarily about being a scientist when it comes to those sorts of things. Is that the sort of thing that you're referring to here?
Yeah. Well, we learn about the science facts that we know today, not the ones we know tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's the either or that's the challenge, because nobody would dispute the need to have knowledge-rich curriculum. It's the application of it, and I mean, and again, the PISA results show the same. The need to have both. My own research, I did a systematic review of traditional and alternative methods of assessment and pedagogy, looking at the empirical evidence, which is actually quite sparse. And what came out of that is that the model that works best is actually teaching the knowledge rich part, checking that, and then having space to actually have people apply it. What's also interesting through that systematic review is actually you can evaluate these approaches two ways. You can do an intervention and then do an assessment straight after. What's more interesting, though, is if you look at the intervention 6 months later or even be longer, because the differences change. So any intervention as I said, the sparse empirical evidence seems to be it can make a difference, but there's a lot of the actual benefits seem to appear 6 or 12 months later, and shows the importance of being able to apply learning as well as know these facts. And I think that's got to do with how we do educational research. We need to really think about being willing to look a lot more longitudinal, make sure that the things that we do are evaluated, but also evaluated across the long term.
And there's a challenge there too, and I'd be interested in your thoughts in terms of research, because we see lots and lots of pilots, and often pilots are small focus groups and so forth. And it's I'm not speaking badly about pilots because they're a part of that research endeavor, but it seems to me that often we run into trouble when we try to look at how we both scale and sustain things from pilots or in a particular context or a particular point of time. And I wonder what your experience has been, or of examples that you've seen of the sort of thing you're talking about that give us research-based, evidence-based stuff over time that really sustains.
Yeah, so I put this in the context of innovation culture, and so pilots are very useful, but there's actually a broader set of pilots that we should be looking at. So, for example, there's lighthouse projects where where something is known to be working, and then we're trying to spread that. There's also a concept called sufficing evidence. So we often talk about the gold standard of random control trials, but some of the research suggests actually, in terms of looking at the future, which is much different and more complex than the past, we should be looking at what's called a sufficing standard, where we ensure that we know that the kernel of the innovation is solid in terms of the research, but then we allow more space for that to happen in different contexts. So we allow it to be contextualized. And what it does is it actually changes the role between bottom up and top down. So the top down have a different role, and that role is to evaluate and put the guardrails around innovation, make sure that things are reasonable, to be evaluating what is actually making more of a difference, to celebrate those successes. So it's a change in thinking that their job is to actually see some of these successes and amplify it. So that's a different way of operating to create this culture and to allow change. Of course, Education International makes the point that with the complex world and changing world, schools are already innovating, and they talk about these micro innovations that aren't always curated. So we don't always identify them. And we all know that one of the greatest ways to get positive change is to identify where change is happening positively, sustainably already, and to learn from that. And I think if we spend a bit more time identifying some of those changes, curating it, and sharing it, as part of that innovation culture, I would also talk about the concept of the school next door. We need to make sure that we start connecting schools, not just in professional learning communities, but more directly, that if there's a teacher with a passion or a strength in a particular area, who may not want to present to 200 people, they might be happy to share that expertise with the school next door. And so we need to look at opportunities to share that, because again, when people talk in context, so if I know that the school next door is similar to my school and this is how they do it and they're having success, I would love to learn about these things and to then maybe see how that motivates the work that I'm doing. I'm not necessarily, again, to be policy borrowing or borrowing that particular approach, although I might if I think it's that great, but I want to learn from it. And so it's these opportunities I call it innovation culture. Innovation's not always seen as a positive word, but innovation has two sets to it. Next practice has two parts to it. One is the novel and the experimentation, doing things differently. But just as importantly, next practice is also about reframing current practice for contemporary needs. And so having the opportunity to reflect on what we're currently doing and seeing how we can tweak it is just as important as coming up with a new pilot, for example.
Yeah, I love that. In the work that I do in New Zealand with a colleague, we talk a lot about creating a culture of experimentation as a baseline within a school that embraces both of what you're talking about, both experimenting around the new things, but also experimenting about how we can take the things that are already working and do that sort of appreciative mindset that comes with that. One of the things, though, and I noticed in the latest TELUS report in the New Zealand case study, I was looking at it, there were two areas that were sort of valued highly in terms of teachers, overall workload and what they do. And one, they were both related to, professional learning, to having the time to carry out those experiments, to do that. And it seems that the messaging there is that seems to be being constrained more and more, and people just feel like they don't actually have that. And I wonder whether you've got some thoughts or ideas from your experience about how, as education leaders, because you've been in two roles in the system that do that, you can encourage that time to be taken and devoted to what's going to really matter.
Yeah, so professional learning is a really interesting one because the effectiveness of it, when it's delivered to everybody out of context, there's research to debate whether that's effective. But more important, if we follow, for example, Gusty's 5 levels, he has a really, it's a linear approach that says you have to be given quality professional learning. So that's the first thing. Secondly, it actually has to be reorganized. So you have to take those thoughts from sitting in a meeting, if you're sitting in a meeting, as opposed to working in context, and work out what does that mean for my work. The next thing is you'll say, well, how does that actually change my practice as a teacher? How does it change the learner practice? And then it might change outcomes. So working it through there. through the work of the OECD, our project on new professionalism, the future of teaching, one of the things that we looked at was that more about professional identity, and that this
Oh,
and how do you tie professional learning to actually what I need to know at this point in time. So point in time learning from others, as I mentioned before, this idea of if someone's working in my context in my school, I could probably learn from them because they're doing it in my context, and there's one way forward. The other part of it is that related to this is a metaphor that we took from borrowed from other people using a soccer analogy. Sometimes mostly we're developing schools with a team of midfielders. We're actually asking all teachers to be the same, where we know from our work around professionalism is about career specialisation, opportunity to follow passions, not expecting everyone to be I mean, we've all got to have certain skills, but allowing for those passions to sort of be developed and shared and create the experts. Because at the end of the day, the experts in teaching kids in 2025 and 2026 are teachers in 2025 and 2026.
yes.
And that's where we have to tap into that expertise. Evangelica Demirudi, who's an organizational psychologist, developed a theory called jobs demand resourcing. And the JDR theory is that there are two sides to every job. There are parts where you would like more support and you should be given it if you want job satisfaction. And there are parts where you actually want more demand, where you want to show your passions,
Yeah.
you want opportunities to shine. And there's a lot of people out there who have amazing skills, but they need somebody else to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, can we share this? Can we share it as part of that information up to the system? Can we share it to the school next door? And so, and the term is job crafting. So what if everybody had the opportunity for their job to be crafted? So if we've got a set of professionals in schools,
Yeah.
and sometimes we say with the curriculum demands, all the system demands, we have to all do the same thing. We're all midfielders. But if we actually changed our HR thinking, we would start trying to tap into the talent we already have and to look at where those people, particularly the people who need more support, obviously that's key, but also where are the opportunities to actually pick up the people who want more demands and link them with other people with similar interests. AI is a good example. We want teachers being involved in the AI
Yeah.
space. There are teachers out there doing some amazing things. Are we connecting them? And are we connecting together for a start? And then is the system able to listen to them? There are systems, for example, in Wales that have a residency program that do exactly this, where they actually spend time. They bring people into the system for a period of time around key ideas, but they remain as schoolies. So they're not in there as a policymaker or bureaucrat.
Yeah.
They're in there to be the ears and the eyes of the profession and to provide guidance to the system. So it's a very simple example, but we need to have more just connecting people across schools as well.
Yeah, I love hearing what you're saying because you're obviously an advocate like I am for the networking, thinking of ourselves as being part of an ecosystem rather than, isolated in our own school or even our own classroom, seems to be a really important part of that. And I'm wondering, there's a part of me that's both excited by that, but also wondering how we can raise that level of ambition for our young teachers, because what we're seeing reported over and over is that so many of those who are entering our profession at the moment aren't really coming in with a view to being part of a profession almost. That it's a job, it's a task, and they're quite happy simply to be told what to do and how to do it. And I'm wondering, aside from the Welsh example you gave, which is quite illuminating, whether you've got other things that you looked at as part of your OECD work that could be helpful there.
Yeah, so for each future of the teaching study, we've done 4 so far. We developed a set of personas, teacher personas, and 6 different personas or 7, depending on the context. Each of them are a pair, so 2 early career teachers in primary or rural or secondary, urban. And the idea was to make policy making more complicated by saying that actually, there's not one teacher. If you actually, there are different types of teachers with different needs and different across their professional career space.
Oh, yeah.
So mid-career when you've got family, you might have a lot of family pressure and less, and that which encroaches a bit on your professional work. But how you're treated during that space and supported will have an impact on what happens after you finish that family phase and you're ready to do more. We saw examples, for example, of older women in rural settings in some countries where they were ready to. They had space, their family had grown up, they had space to share, and but there was no mechanism to actually tap into those people. People just assumed that because they didn't have as much space when they were having their family, that they weren't
Right.
interested in doing things now. So there was that.
Yeah.
But coming back to your point about the new teachers, the persona that we had in each of the countries, the most provocative, harder to develop the evidence around, was the teacher of the future.
Yeah.
Uh, because we need to be preparing for the teacher of the future as well as making sure that the system values the experienced teachers, and that's a really tough trick. But the teacher of the future is a professional first, so that people choose what profession to be part of, and you've got all these choices. Many of those choices have a lot of flexibility in terms of when you can have holidays, when you can work at home. So already teaching's got a few challenges to deal with. But then you start to think, well, how how do we attract young professionals into teaching? This is the question. How do we attract young professionals into teaching? And when you talk to young professionals, or certainly read the research about this, they do want collaboration. They
Mm.
do want to have they want to be they want to be developed. That's they expect it. They expect to be developed. So while you may have stories of some people who just want to just do what they're told. There are if we want to attract the right type of people into the profession, maybe we need to think more boldly.
Yeah.
And interesting in the research, the German research, there's a provocation because in Tallis and any research you want to read, 90% or more of teachers become teachers because they want to make a difference to
Yeah.
the world and to young people. But this German research is a provocation that maybe we need to be demanding a bit more. Maybe we need to say teaching is actually about leadership skills, entrepreneurship skills, technology skills. What if we, and I'm not saying these are the characteristics that I would say, but what characteristics can we be putting out there that our profession offers to attract young professionals to choose teaching over other professions? And this is how I see the challenge. And just as a little anecdote, one of the future teaching study workshops we ran, multi-stakeholder people, who we developing a future scenario. Then we asked them to compare that future scenario, their preferred future, using this future teacher. And within about 2 minutes, they said, "We've got to go back to the drawing board because we're not pushing hard enough. We're not challenging ourselves enough to think differently about what's possible." And as I mentioned earlier about the team of midfielders, young professionals don't want to be treated as the same. They want to have options to develop their talents and to feel as though they can be nurtured how they might want to do it, have a career path that's more than just becoming an administrator, a bureaucrat, or an academic, or a school leader. They want to have more explicit career paths that provide opportunities that values them. Again, the AI example. If I'm really good at AI, what about if I had an opportunity for 3 months to work on a project with other colleagues and experts from outside of education to contribute to the system? These are the sort of ways we need to be thinking differently about our profession and not get constrained by the system demands.
Yeah.
The system has to unleash and celebrate these opportunities.
So there's some fabulous ideas in there, Jason. I'm just thinking about our time for this conversation, and I can see we're going to have another one. But I want to ask you to put on your principal hat for a moment because I've been listening to quite a number of the things that you've been saying, and you've vacillated a little bit between being the system thinker, but also the in school. So just for a moment, the principal hat. If there are school leaders here, whether it's principals, APDP, someone who's in a school who has a locus of control over things that happen in their school, what would be those two, three, four key things that you would say to them that would release them to be able to do some of the things you've just been talking to me about?
Yep. So the first thing is have two types of friends. The first type of friend gives you the black and white rules to
Yeah.
make sure that you do what you need to do. Because there are some things that are black and white you need to do, and you need to make sure. But you need another group of friends to be the ones that can tell you how to bend the rules, but not get into trouble. And that's really important because and it's not being subversive. It's actually what, as a leader, you need to step up and you need to be able to interpret the rules. And the research is very clear on this. The best leaders, the most effective leaders, are the ones that can take system demands and policies, personalize them. Don't say we're just doing this because the system told us. We work out what this means for us and our ethos of where we're going and the opportunities. So we have to step up as a leader, recognize that we have to meet those demands. We also need to make sure that we're communicating our views as leaders about how we think the system should be dealing with some of these. So that's the other one. The second one is create a culture of yes, where your job is to say yes. So in the school that I went to, one of the nicest compliments I got after being there for a while was they said, Jason, you didn't bring an agenda with you. And I said, well, I didn't think I needed to, but certainly I brought some areas to play. But what I did was I was able to create a culture, and like all great leadership, it was by accident. Create a culture of yes. So people. Well, one person knocked on my door actually early on in my principalship, knocked on my door and said, Jason, we need $20 to repair a rugby jersey. And I was a bit upset. I'm quite a calm person, but I said, sorry, it's not my job to give you $20. It's my job to give you 2,000 or 20,000. My job is not to give you 2,000. So that $20. So that was a start of having to make sure that faculties had enough money not only to do their business, but also strategic money.
Yep.
So that was some strategic stuff to do. But then it was about showing to people, look, my job is to say, yes, I've got some money that I can support with projects. What you need to do is you need to step out that process. You need to give me a clear vision what it looks like at its best time. You step it out what needs to happen first or second or third. And through that culture, people learnt that they could come to me with a decent idea. They might walk out and say, you've got to talk to these 5 people because they've also got relevant things. But it was about creating that culture. And I had to learn too, because one of the things early on, again, in my principalship, I had set up some strategic resourcing for a couple of faculties. And I said at the end of the year, I'm going to have to ask everybody to put their strategic priorities in. And someone said to me, no, don't do it, Jason. I said, why not? It's got to be fair. But what they said was, no, wait for them to come to you and say yes. And so everyone was treated the same. They all knew how to get the money, but they had to come to me with their plan, and we weren't just going to share the funding around, and some would be strategic and some wouldn't. So that was something that I learned that was a little bit something confronting for me, but it was true. It was a good lesson to learn.
Yeah, I can imagine that really goes to the notion of teacher agency in there too, doesn't it? That it's a deep connection with bringing out from them the desires, the ambitions. It goes back to your notion of the not a team of midfielders. It'll expose who's in the fullback and who's a striker and so forth. I can really see that working. So you have your different
just on that. Yes, that's exactly right. And what I learned from that was, like, we had some initiatives to do with mathematics, for example, and I was amazed at the level of understanding that the maths faculty, led by the maths head teacher, had regarding the complexities of teaching maths, and how an idea that I could understand up here, but when they started talking, the layer of learning and understanding and knowledge, and I call, I'm fairly well researched in these things, but I could never be the expert in maths. It was exactly what you said, that you can only do it by collaboration and that culture.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great example. So you've given me two groups of friends. You've given me the culture of yes, rounding off as a good educator, have you got a third one you can throw in there?
Yeah, I think as a principal, it's be prepared to play. So,
Yeah,
so one of the things, some advice that I got early on, which I learned from, I didn't actually agree with it, was write down your legacies that you want and communicate them. And I felt no, that's a bit rude coming into a school and doing that. But within a few months of being there, unfortunately I started towards the end of the school year. A whole lot of people came to me and told me their story about their connection with school, their connection with being teacher, parents, and that. And I felt I had to get back who I was. Um, but when I outlined those legacies, what it allowed me to do is to say, you can judge me by these, but I'm also telling you where I'm going to play.
yeah,
So a lot of my job was supporting others, creating space for others, but I also had the chance to play. I was able to um, teach some of the innovative subjects and some of the non-innovative subjects, to actually value the opportunity to learn. I can never go around and say, oh yeah, I'm teaching a few periods, therefore I know what it's like to be a teacher. But it gave me some connection and an opportunity. So yeah, so having the opportunity to play, finding a place where you feel like you can genuinely uh, contribute to what was my first legacy, which was the school is organised around a pedagogical model. So everything's around the day-to-day work in the classroom of kids and their teachers. That's what the school should be organised around. So if we're going to be organised around that, I'm going to be in some classrooms, each week too.
trying. So one of the thoughts that went through my mind when you talked about being prepared to play, and it sort of came through, is whenever we talk about play, there's an element of risk involved in that, isn't it? Because you're exposing yourself to things that might not work alongside those that do. Do you see that as a critical part of that?
Not so much actually, because I
Okay.
see it slightly differently. I see it more in an action research mindset. There's not many
Okay.
things that we've done and it's failed dramatically. And then so what has happened is as you start to do any innovation, you start to learn and you start to make changes.
Yep.
So learning. So these you have an idea on a bit of paper, maybe one piece of paper, one page. As you start to talk it through more, and as you develop the legs around, as you actually implement it, it takes a life of its own. And as long as you continue to actually learn from it, that's what life's about, right? That's what we want our kids to do, as to address the challenges of their lives. That's what we should do as well. So I never thought as much about fear of failure. We had a fear of success actually, which one of our first innovations worked so well we didn't know how to actually repeat it, and it took some time, but we eventually did repeat it and embedded it into our system of curriculum, which was fantastic. But that was probably the greatest fear I had to manage.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I really like the way you framed that because that's where I would come back to is that continually that iterative development. And I guess when I was talking about risk, I was looking at it not from that negative failure point of view, but so much as being able to take making sure the guardrails are far enough apart that gives you the area to try in those grey spaces, the edges where otherwise you might feel constrained. Because if you think about play-based learning and these other sort of pedagogical approaches, that's really what lies behind that. And it's so often for our teachers and even ourselves as leaders, those guardrails feel much tighter, and we don't feel that we can take those risks, make those efforts. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, first to go back to my first point, which is get the right friends, but secondly, I guess a subgroup of those friends spend like as a secondary educator, even though I was principal of a K to 12 school, spend some time with early years educators because they are absolutely amazing in terms of their mindsets, in terms of the way that they deliver curriculum to young people. Um, and they have control of the environment and the learning of individual kids. And if you spend some time with them and ask them to work. We actually had one staff meeting. I remember the first day. It was the end of actually it was during the first week. Sorry, and we had a staff meeting, and because we were K to 12, I was sitting and just happened to be with the kindergarten year one teachers and some secondary teachers, and we went around the table saying, "What did you do? What did you do this week?" And when the kindergarten and year one teachers spoke about the practices that they had to manage, the secondary teachers were just gobsmacked. They could not believe the amount of skills and happening all at once. It's but yeah, so that would be my. I've learned lots from early years teachers.
Yeah, well, so have I, and it's a piece of advice I would strongly take from you and support. In fact, I went beyond that, Jason. I not only talked to early childhood teachers, I actually married one, so that had a huge influence on my outlook.
Well, there you
But
go.
look, I really appreciate this chat. As I said before, I think we may have to connect again, Jason. I always enjoy our conversations anyway, but thank you for giving us time to have this one recorded so we can share it a little bit more widely with our Ed Rising teams and so forth. Don't know whether you've got any parting thoughts about anchoring future focused thinking in our education system.
As I said, let's just keep talking, and I think magic will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Jason.